The Big 12 is very ready to be on par with the SEC and the Big 10, especially if Florida State and Clemson are added. And maybe the biggest question that I was asking 6 months ago, when the first person was like, hey, wait a second. Now that Florida State's suing the ACC, could they possibly come to the Big 12? And everybody looks at that guy, laughs, and says, no, that's stupid. That's silly. They have the intent to go to the Big 10 or the SEC, and the Big 12 can pick up a Louisville, a Pitt, somebody in Miami that it's not them. Here's what I need you to know. Here's what, when you go to the water cooler and that guy goes, well, it's the SEC and the Big 10. They're not going to let the Florida States and Clemsons of the world fall through the cracks. They are. The reason the Big 12 is in this conversation is because of its commissioner. Brett Yormark, in the last 2 years, has done whatever it takes to put the Big 12 at the forefront of college athletics. And the Big 12 is not there yet, but it's getting there. And again, if you subscribe to common sense, when the money makes sense for Florida State and Clemson to come to the Big 12, this move is made. At that point, the Big 12 is in the same boat with the SEC and the Big 10, and those two conferences can no longer leave this league behind. There's no longer those two at the top are going to make a decision on their own and then move forward without the Big 12, and sorry for the Big 12, smell you later. At this point in time, I cannot tell you that a Big 10 or SEC offer is worse than a Big 12 offer. What I can tell you is that from all of the reporting that we have gotten this week from everybody that exists, the SEC is not currently interested in Florida State and Clemson. And Greg Sankey has given you that rhetoric for over a year now, that the SEC is in a fine spot with Texas and Oklahoma. They're not actively searching out anyone else. And I ask you, what would Florida State and Clemson bring to the SEC aside from maybe the fourth and fifth biggest brands? And even then, I've told you this a million times, give me 30 seconds. Lend me your ear for 30 seconds. When Clemson sucks, they don't really make money. Less revenue in football than Bowling Green 15 years ago because Clemson wasn't very good at football. They had some weird, bad years in like the upper aughts, and they didn't make money. When Dabo Swinney's gone, are they going to make money? Or are they going to be Miami? Because Miami was really good. And then 20 years later, you look up and you go, I don't know if I love Miami. The fan base stinks. The football team's not good. In Miami, what do they actually bring you? Clemson could very well be that in 10 years' time. The SEC knows that. The SEC doesn't want to add Miami. And 20 years ago, that's the equivalent of adding today's Clemson. Miami was the cream of the crop, the bee's knees. But was it sustainable? No. Is it sustainable for Clemson? No. Does the SEC already have South Carolina? Yes. Those two schools, one, Clemson, namely, the SEC doesn't really want. Florida State, they're just kind of like the thorn in the side. You can't walk in our conference. It's like if I'm Greg Sankey and I'm hearing what Florida State is coming with, it's like you can't walk into our league thinking that you got to be the big dog. You just sued your conference. You got to exit. You can walk to the SEC. You can start making changes, making moves, being the big dog, being a character that everybody respects. No. Even Texas was more humble than you would expect going to the SEC. Even they were kind of like chest pumped out. I don't know what's going on over there in Austin, but they were oddly normal. Florida State won't do that. They're not showing that. In the case of Utah to the Big, this reminds me a lot of Utah to the Big 12. The difference was Utah was desperate. Utah didn't have a landing spot in the Big 10. Utah certainly didn't have one in the SEC, and they didn't want to go to the ACC, understanding the turmoil that was coming. So they were stuck with the Big 12. They were cocky, yeah. But they couldn't be too cocky that they ruined their chance getting to the conference because they had nowhere else to go. Florida State, they believe that they can be cocky and be the big dog and go to the SEC. And the SEC is not going to take that. The Big 10. There's this AAU accreditation thing. You've got to be a nerd school. You got to be a smart school. Or we're not going to let you in here. We're not going to let you in. I told you I was wrong. I was wrong. I've been wrong on this show a couple of times. I said, and this kind of goes back to the, common sense follows the money. I said that money's going to trump all in this conversation and that Florida State and Clemson could easily walk into the Big 10 with or without AAU accreditation. The Big 10 doesn't care that much about academics as long as they're making money. Now, egg on my face, sounds like they're actually going to stick this whole we want the nerd schools and only the nerd schools thing. I try not to quote the Twitter expansion people. I try not to. But this one from Greg Swaim seems to be something that is gaining traction something that more people are talking about, says Florida State getting a horrible national reputation, as is well documented, but perhaps the Big 12 just losing two of the most entitled fan bases in college football and adding another in Utah. Does Yormark actually want to add SMU? Or actually want to add Florida State? So it's like we're flipping it back around and going, well, maybe we don't want to add Florida State either because they're mean. One fan base, one program, one school that wants to be the top dog. Another school that it's just going to be irrelevant in 15 years if they're losing. And one conference that needs you to be a nerd school, and another conference that says, we have brands that are better than that. Texas is bigger than Florida State. They just added them. Oklahoma and Florida State are kind of on par with each other here, especially when you take into account that Florida is already in the conference. They've already gotten major representation from that state. So with that, both those conferences they're content. The Big 12 adds those two brands, gets 18 teams, has a Utah, has a Kansas State, who year in and year out could be at Clemson. I look at the Big 10 and I say, who? I mean, the past 10 years, they've only had three teams. Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. The Michigan sucked for a good portion of that. Yeah. Like, oh, well, Wisconsin, sure. But what is Wisconsin if not Kansas State? Oh, but Iowa, yeah, sure. But what is Iowa if not Utah? Oh, but no, it's about three teams. And now you got Oregon and Washington to contend with. What's Washington going to be? USC has stunk. They went 7-5 last year with a Heisman winning quarterback. You know, UCLA has stunk. Their head coach left to be the offensive coordinator somewhere else. Their head coach went to be the offensive coordinator. Not good. You go to the Big 12 and you say, you can be on par with that. You add Florida State and Clemson, you can be on par with that. Especially if those two teams win. Common sense says with private equity and fast channels and all the other ways that Brett Yormark's making money here, it could just be enough. It could just be enough. On Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. eBay Motors keeps your ride or die alive. I am not in my car. I don't have my Nissan Maxima with me this week because I rode the bus with the party animals to North Carolina. And the bus is making a weird noise. And I was like, hey, that sounds like a valve. And so they can go, if the bus driver wants to, get superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, or valves, eBay Motors has you covered. 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. That is ebaymotors.com. Millions of parts for your MVP.